People think the night that changes your life arrives with warning. It doesn't. It comes disguised as exhaustion, cold air, and one scream you can't ignore. My shift at St. Mary's had ended 43 minutes earlier, but the smell of antiseptic still clung to my scrubs, and my feet still ached like I was pacing the yard instead of walking the narrow boardwalk behind Harbor Point. It was just after 11 p.m., the kind of March night that sank straight through your jacket and settled in your bones. The fog rolling off the water blurred the dock lights into pale gold smears, and every few seconds the wooden planks beneath my sneakers gave a tired creak, like even the pier wanted to go home. I remember tugging my ponytail loose and promising myself I'd never pick up another double shift again, even though I knew that was a lie. Nurses live on lies like that. 5 more minutes. One more patient. One more overnight. I had almost reached the parking lot when I heard it. Not a splash at first. A scream. Small. Sharp. Cut off so fast it made every muscle in my body lock. I turned toward the water, so quickly my tote bag slipped off my shoulder and hit the boards. For 1/2 second, all I could see was fog and black water moving under the dock lights. Then I saw a tiny hand break the surface about 20 feet from shore. My body moved before my mind did. I dropped everything and ran. The wind slapped my face hard enough to make my eyes water, and my sneakers skidded on damp wood as I reached the edge. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, was going under again, her pale pink coat dragging her down like it had been made of bricks instead of cotton. I kicked off my shoes, climbed over the railing, and jumped. The cold hit like a car crash. It stole my breath so fast I couldn't even scream. 1 second I was in the air, the next I was buried in icy black water with my scrub top twisting around my arms, and my heart pounding so hard it felt dangerous. I surfaced choking, shoved wet hair out of my face, and forced my eyes open against the sting. "Hey," I shouted, my voice breaking in the wind. "I'm here. I'm here." She didn't answer. She was too far under. I dove again, reached through freezing dark, and my fingers brushed fabric. Then a wrist. So small. So cold. I grabbed her and kicked upward with everything I had left. By the time I dragged her onto the rocky edge near the pilings, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of her. She was limp. Her lips were blue. Her lashes clung together with water. For one terrible second, the world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing and the memory of every child I'd ever seen come into trauma too late. "No," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. "No, sweetheart, stay with me." Training took over where fear tried to break me. I tilted her head, checked her airway, counted under my breath, and began. The fog swirled around us. My wet sleeves clung to my skin. Somewhere far behind me, tires screeched. Headlights cut through the mist in long white blades. But I didn't look up. Not yet. Because at that moment, nothing in the world mattered except the little girl beneath my hands and the silent prayer pounding through me with every heartbeat. "Breathe, baby. Please. Just breathe." The first breath came like a miracle and a wound at the same time. Water spilled from the little girl's mouth in a thin rush, and then she coughed, sharp and weak, her tiny body jerking beneath my hands as if life had grabbed her and pulled her back at the very last second. I let out a sound that barely felt human, something between a sob and a prayer, and rolled her gently onto her side the way I had done 100 times in trauma rooms under fluorescent lights that never cared whether people lived or died. "That is it," I whispered, brushing wet hair away from her face with fingers that would not stop trembling. "That is it, sweetheart. Stay with me. You are okay. You are okay." She was not okay, not really. She was freezing, shivering in little broken bursts that made my chest ache, but she was breathing, and for those first few seconds that was enough. Then the world rushed back and all at once. Car doors slammed. Men shouted. Footsteps pounded across the dock behind me with the kind of speed that meant panic, not curiosity. I looked up, blinking water from my eyes, and saw headlights cutting through the fog in harsh white beams. 3 black SUVs sat crooked near the pier entrance, engines still running, their lights reflecting off the wet boards like broken glass. Men in dark coats spread out fast, scanning the shoreline with an urgency that made the air feel charged. And then one of them stepped past all the others, and the night seemed to shift around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, And somehow, even with the fog pressing around us and the freezing wind coming off the water, he looked completely untouched by chaos. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of presence that made every other person nearby feel like background noise. But it was not his clothes or his face that caught me. It was his expression when he saw the child. Something inside him broke without making a sound. He was on his knees beside us a second later, his voice low and rough in a way that did not match the steel in the rest of him. Lily. Just that one word, and I knew. Father. She is breathing, I said quickly, shifting back to give him space even though my own body was shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingers. She aspirated some water, and she needs to go to the hospital now. She should be monitored for the next 24 hours at least. His eyes lifted to mine then, and I forgot the cold. They were not just dark. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. For one strange suspended beat, he said nothing. He just looked at me, soaked through in hospital scrubs, kneeling in freezing mud with his daughter's life still clinging to my hands. Then he slipped one arm under the little girl with a gentleness that did not fit the men standing behind him and rose to his feet. Get the doctor on the phone, he said without taking his eyes off me. His voice was controlled now. Precise. The kind of voice people obeyed before they even realized they had been given an order. One of the men moved instantly. Another stepped forward with a wool blanket and tried to drape it around my shoulders. I flinched before I could stop myself. The man holding Lily noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him probably noticed everything. You are freezing, he said. You are coming with us. I pushed myself up on unsteady legs, wrapping the blanket tighter even though my teeth were chattering. No. She needs help, and you need to go now. I can drive myself. A flicker passed over his face. Not anger exactly. More like disbelief. As if people did not usually tell him no, and certainly not women dripping harbor water in discount scrubs. Behind him, the fog rolled thicker across the dock, and Lily made a weak, sleepy sound against his chest. His gaze stayed locked on mine. You are not walking away from this alone, he said, quiet enough that somehow it felt more absolute than a shout. For a second, I just stared at him. Harbor water was dripping from the ends of my hair, sliding down the back of my neck beneath the borrowed blanket, and every part of me ached with cold and adrenaline and the delayed shock that always comes after a life almost slips through your hands. I should have been thinking clearly. I should have been focused on getting home, changing into dry clothes, maybe calling in sick for my shift the next morning for the first time in 3 years. Instead, I was standing on a fog-soaked pier arguing with a man whose presence made the air feel heavier around him. I am fine. I lied, because nurses are trained to say that even when our hands are blue and our knees are shaking. He glanced once at my bare feet on the wet boards, then at the thin hospital scrubs plastered to my skin, and something unreadable moved through his expression. Not softness. Men like him probably did not have the luxury of softness. But not indifference either. You jumped into 40-degree water, he said. You are not fine. Before I could answer, Lily stirred weakly in his arms, a small whimper escaping her lips as her head shifted against his coat. Every line in his body changed. The steel did not disappear, but it bent around her, protective in a way that made my chest tighten for reasons I did not want to examine. He lowered his head, murmured something too quietly for me to hear, and the little girl settled again. That should have been my cue to leave. Child breathing. Father present. Crisis transferred. Scene over. But one of the men was already opening the rear door of the nearest SUV, and another had produced a pair of thick wool socks from somewhere, which felt almost absurd given the fact that 5 minutes ago I had been trying to pull a child out of black water. Put those on, the tall man said. You can refuse everything else after she is seen by a doctor. I let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like frustration. You do not get to order me around just because you are scared. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. The men behind him stopped moving. Even the wind felt like it had paused to listen. His eyes came back to mine, dark and steady and dangerous in a way I could not fully explain. Most people would probably have looked away first. I have never been especially good at most people. No, he said after a moment, his voice low enough that I had to lean in slightly to catch it over the water. I do not. But I do get to make sure the woman who saved my daughter does not collapse in a parking lot trying to prove a point. That should not have affected me. It definitely should not have warmed some strange guarded place inside my chest. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he had said woman instead of nurse. As if for 1 second, he saw something more human than the scrubs and wet hair and shaking hands. I hated that I noticed. I hated even more that I no longer had the energy to argue. One of his men crouched and placed the socks at my feet without a word. Another held out a pair of polished leather shoes that obviously belonged to someone at least 2 sizes bigger than me. The whole thing was so surreal, I almost laughed. Instead, I sat on the edge of the open SUV door and pulled the socks on with numb fingers while Lily's father watched in silence. The interior of the vehicle glowed with soft amber light and smelled like leather, cedar, and something expensive I could not name. The opposite of my 12-year-old Honda with its cracked dashboard and stale coffee cups in the console. When I finally looked up, he was still standing there, coat damp from the fog, daughter in his arms, eyes fixed on me with a focus that felt less like gratitude and more like decision. "What is your name?" he asked. My fingers stilled on the borrowed shoe. It was such a simple question. Ordinary. Harmless. But something in the way he asked it made the answer feel like a door swinging open. "Claire," I said quietly. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory was the most natural thing in the world. "I am Adrian Moretti," he said. And even before the men around him lowered their eyes slightly, even before the name settled in the freezing air between us like something with weight, I knew I was never going to forget it. Hearing his name should have meant something immediately. Maybe it would have, if I had been wearing dry clothes and standing under hospital lights instead of shivering in an SUV that felt warmer than any place I had been in months. But exhaustion has a way of dulling everything except instinct, and mine kept circling the same thought like it did not trust the answer. Men did not move like that around ordinary people. They did not go silent when ordinary people spoke. Adrian Moretti climbed in beside Lily after I had settled across from them, and the door closed with a soft, expensive sound that cut the wind away completely. The sudden quiet made the whole night feel unreal. 1 second there had been freezing water and fog and my own heartbeat in my ears. The next there was leather under my fingertips, a clean wool blanket tucked around my shoulders by someone I had not asked for help, and a little girl breathing in shallow, sleepy bursts against her father's chest. "St. Mary's," I said automatically, because my brain had finally found one clear track to run on. "She needs a chest X-ray, oxygen saturation monitoring, and observation in case of delayed complications." Adrian did not look away from Lily when he answered. "Already arranged." Of course it was. I should not have found that irritating. I did anyway. Maybe because I was used to fighting for every warm blanket, every room, every specialist, every tiny thing hospitals somehow never had enough of. Watching a man like him speak 2 words and make the world rearrange itself around his daughter stirred something sharp in me that felt too much like envy. I looked out the window instead. The harbor lights smeared past in long gold streaks as the SUV pulled away from the pier, smooth and fast and silent. One vehicle moved in front of us, another behind. Escort. Protection. Whatever name fit that kind of formation, it was not normal, and every passing block made that harder to ignore. "Claire." Adrian said my name like he had been testing its weight in his mind. I turned back before I could stop myself. Lily was still in his arms, wrapped now in another thick blanket one of the men had handed through the door. Her dark curls were damp against his coat. Her tiny hand had fisted in the fabric near his collar, like even half-conscious. She knew exactly where safety was supposed to be. "Did you see how she fell in?" he asked. The question was calm. Too calm. But I heard what sat underneath it. Fear sharpened into control. I swallowed and shook my head. "No." I heard her scream, then saw her in the water. That is all. His jaw tightened once. Barely. A movement so small I might have missed it if I had not spent years reading faces across emergency beds, learning to catch the moment families realized something terrible might have happened. "She was not supposed to be near the dock," he said, more to himself than to me. I opened my mouth to say something practical, something safe, but a shiver hit so hard my teeth clicked together. Mortifying. One of the men in the front passenger seat twisted around instantly. "Sir, she needs heat now." Adrian's gaze snapped to me. Not my face this time. My hands. My lips. The way I was trying and failing to hide how badly the cold had gotten into me. "Stop at Mercy East," he said. "No." I said it once, straightening beneath the blanket. "Absolutely not. Lily needs to get to St. Mary's, And I am not taking up space in an emergency room because I made one reckless decision tonight. That got his full attention. Those dark eyes settled on me, steady and unblinking, and the air inside the SUV seemed to draw tight. You made a brave decision, he said. And now you are shaking hard enough that you can barely form a sentence. I am forming several, actually. It slipped out before I could stop it. For one suspended second, I thought I had made a mistake. Then something surprising happened. Not a smile exactly. More like the memory of one threatening the corner of his mouth before discipline erased it. The change was so slight, it would have been easy to miss. I did not miss it. Then form one more, he said quietly. Tell me where you live, and I will make sure a physician comes to you after Lily is admitted. I stared at him. The polished confidence. The impossible certainty that solutions could simply appear if you wanted them badly enough. That is not necessary. It is to me. The words landed softer than the others had, but they did more damage. Because gratitude, I knew how to refuse. Obligation, I knew how to escape. But that tone held something more personal, and I did not know what to do with it. Outside, the city kept sliding by in reflections and traffic lights. Inside, Lily shifted and let out a sleepy sigh, and Adrian adjusted the blanket around her with the same careful hands that had signed orders into the night. I looked down at my own raw knuckles, still pink from cold water and rescue and effort, and had the strange, unsettling feeling that stepping into this vehicle had done more than get me out of the cold. It had pulled me across some invisible line, and I no longer knew how far from shore I was. By the time we reached St. Mary's, the initial surge of adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind something worse. Exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your bones and makes even simple thoughts feel heavy. The SUV rolled beneath the emergency entrance canopy, and before the tires had fully stopped, 2 nurses and a physician were already outside with a pediatric gurney. Of course they were. People moved fast around Adrian Moretti, like hesitation was a luxury his world did not permit. The rear door opened, and cold night air slipped inside, carrying the sharp scent of rain and city concrete. Adrian stepped out first with Lily still in his arms, holding her close beneath the blanket as the medical team surrounded him. For one irrational second, I wanted to follow so I could keep my eyes on her oxygen, her breathing, the color in her lips. But this was my hospital, my territory, my own people, and somehow that made me feel even more out of place. Claire. I turned. Adrian had stopped before handing Lily over, his gaze fixed on me with that same unnerving steadiness. You should be seen next. I am not a patient. My voice came out softer than I intended, worn thin by fatigue and too many emotions colliding at once. One of the nurses, Jenna from the night team, looked between us with wide, startled eyes she was trying hard to hide. She knew me. She also knew enough about power to recognize it when it walked through automatic doors in a tailored overcoat carrying a soaked child. Claire, you look terrible, she said, which was not exactly the comfort she probably meant it to be. Thank you, Jenna. That is very healing to hear. That earned me the smallest twitch from Adrian again. Almost a reaction, almost amusement. The nurse reached for my arm, and I let her, mostly because arguing suddenly felt like work. Come on, she said gently. At least let us get you warm. I looked back at Adrian just as the doctor began checking Lily's pupils and asking rapid questions. He answered every one without raising his voice. Time of submersion, maybe 2 minutes. Initial response, spontaneous breathing after resuscitation. Current symptoms, lethargy and intermittent cough. He listened the way men in control always listen, with total focus and no wasted motion. But his hand never left Lily's blanket. Not once. That was what stayed with me. Not the money. Not the men flanking the hallway. Not the way the registration clerk nearly tripped over herself to clear a room. It was that hand. Careful. Steady. Protective in a way that felt too real to fake. I let Jenna guide me to an exam bay 3 curtains down, where someone wrapped me in heated blankets and pressed a thermometer beneath my tongue, while another nurse handed me a paper cup of something warm and sweet. My wet scrubs had been replaced with pale blue hospital scrubs from supply that were 2 sizes too big, and my hair hung damp over my shoulders, combed back with my fingers and not much else. I should have felt ridiculous. Instead, I mostly felt numb. Mild hypothermia, the resident said after listening to my lungs. You are lucky. Lucky. That was one word for it. Another was reckless. Another was changed. I was staring down at my hands when movement beyond the curtain made me glance up. Adrian stood at the entrance of the bay, one hand in the pocket of his coat, the other holding a small white hospital bracelet. Lilies. The fluorescent lights flattened everything around him, but somehow they could not make him look ordinary. "She is stable," he said. 2 words, and the knot in my chest loosened so fast, it almost hurt. "Good." My fingers tightened around the paper cup. "That is good." Silence stretched between us, softer than the ones before. Less sharp, more dangerous. "She asked for you," he said at last. I blinked, sure I had heard him wrong. "What?" She woke up for a moment. His voice lowered, and for the first time since the dock, it sounded tired. "Human." She asked if the angel in blue was coming too. The room went very still. I should have laughed it off. I should have looked away. Instead, I felt heat bloom behind my ribs that had nothing to do with the blankets around me. "I am definitely not an angel," I said quietly. Adrian's eyes held mine. "No," he said, and there was something unreadable in the way he said it, something deeper than gratitude and far more unsettling. "You are not." Then he stepped closer, close enough that I caught the clean dark scent of cedar and winter air again, and placed a business card on the tray beside my bed. No flourish, no speech, just thick cream paper with his name embossed in black and a number written by hand on the back. "If you need anything," he said, "you call that number. Day or night." I looked at the card, then at him. "I saved your daughter, Mr. Moretti. I did not sign a contract." "Adrian," he said immediately. "And no, you did not." His gaze dropped briefly to the hospital bracelet in his hand, then rose again. "But some nights do not end when they should, Claire." I did not understand what he meant. Not fully. Not yet. But as he turned and walked back toward Lily's room with men in dark coats falling silently into step behind him, I had the strange, unshakable feeling that he was right. That night was not over at all. It had only just decided to follow me home. The hospital discharged me at 3:40 in the morning with dry scrubs, a warning to rest, and the kind of thin paper instructions nobody actually reads unless something goes wrong. I drove home through nearly empty streets with both hands locked on the steering wheel, the heater blasting against skin that still could not decide if it was freezing or burning. Every red light felt too long. Every dark intersection made my pulse jump. I told myself it was leftover adrenaline, that by sunrise the whole night would start to feel distant, filed away with all the other terrible and beautiful things nurses learn to survive by turning them into stories. I was wrong. My apartment looked exactly the same when I stepped inside. Second floor walk up, peeling paint in the hallway. One lamp by the couch because the overhead light had died 2 months ago, and I kept forgetting to replace it. My sneakers were still by the door from the day before. A half-read paperback sat face down on the coffee table beside a mug with old tea dried at the bottom. Ordinary. Safe. Mine. And yet nothing inside me felt settled. I showered until the bathroom mirror fogged and my skin turned pink, but the harbor cold stayed somewhere deeper, lodged behind my ribs beside the memory of Lily's tiny blue lips and Adrian Moretti standing in the mist like the night itself had called him there. I slept for maybe 2 hours before my phone started vibrating across the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, expecting the hospital. Instead, I saw an unfamiliar number. For one strange second, my half-awake mind knew who it was before I answered. "Hello." Silence. Then a little girl's voice, small and careful, and still rough with sleep. "Angel in blue?" I sat upright so fast the blanket slid into my lap. "Lily." There was a rustle on the other end, then the distant sound of someone breathing close to the phone but not speaking. "Listening. Daddy said I should say thank you," Lily whispered. The words were so soft they almost disappeared. "You pulled me out of the dark water." Something in my chest folded in on itself. "You do not have to. Thank me, sweetheart." I leaned back against the headboard, pressing one hand to my eyes. "I'm just really glad you are okay." She was quiet for a second. "Are you okay too?" Nobody had asked me that in a way that mattered for a very long time. Not really. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Yes." I lied again, more gently this time. "I am better now." More silence. Then a deeper voice came onto the line, smooth and controlled in that way I already recognized too easily. She insisted. I lowered my hand. The room around me was pale with early morning light now, gray and soft, the kind that makes everything feel honest. "You let your 6-year-old make calls before sunrise." She did not leave much room for negotiation. There it was again, that almost invisible shift in him when it came to Lily. Not warmth exactly, but something close enough to make the distance in his voice feel deliberate, like a wall he had built brick by brick, and only his daughter knew where the door was. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stared at the business card still sitting on my dresser where I had dropped it the night before. Thick cream paper. Black embossed letters. Adrian Moretti. It looked too expensive for my apartment. Too dangerous too. How did you get my number? I asked, already knowing it was a useless question. The hospital had it on file. I exhaled slowly. Of course they did. He did not apologize. Men like Adrian probably did not apologize for obtaining information when they believed it was necessary. The doctor wants Lily to rest today, he said. She is asking for you. My fingers tightened around the phone. Adrian, I am a nurse, not family. She is responding because I was there when she woke up. Even to my own ears, the words sounded thin. Clinical. Defensive. No, he said quietly. She is responding because she trusts you. The apartment felt smaller all at once. The lamp. The coffee table. The faded rug I had bought on clearance 2 winters ago. My whole life had always fit inside manageable borders. Rent. Shifts. Grocery lists. Bills. Sleep when possible. Repeat. Nothing in that life had prepared me for a little girl reaching for me from inside a world guarded by men in black SUVs. I have a shift tonight, I said. Then come this afternoon. His tone did not harden, but something in it settled into certainty. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something more unsettling than either. An expectation that the world would bend because he had already decided how the day would go. I should have refused. I knew that. I should have told him children become attached after trauma, and that the best thing for everyone was distance, rest, and normalcy. Instead, I looked at the weak spring sunlight on my bedroom wall and heard Lily's small voice in my ear asking if I was okay too. 1 hour, I said at last. That is all I can do. The pause on the line lasted barely a second. I will send a car at 1. Absolutely not. I stood up, fully awake now. I know how to drive myself. Another pause. Then that low, measured voice again, impossible to read and harder to forget. Claire, he said, and somehow my name in his mouth sounded less like a word and more like a hand closing gently around a decision. I know you do. The question is whether I am willing to let you. At 12:47, I was still telling myself I was not going. My apartment was cleaner than it had been in months because I had spent the past hour doing what I always did when something felt too big to name. I scrubbed the kitchen counter. Folded laundry that did not need folding. Reorganized the cabinet where I kept tea bags and aspirin and batteries, as if a better arrangement of ordinary things could somehow put the rest of my life back in order. It did not work. At 12:58, my phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. Outside. No name. No explanation. Just that one word. Confident and economical and somehow more irritating than a full paragraph would have been. I looked through the blinds and saw a black sedan parked across from my building, polished enough to reflect the pale afternoon sky. Of course he had sent a car anyway. Of course he had ignored my answer and replaced it with his own. I should have stayed inside on principle alone. Instead, 10 minutes later, I was locking my apartment door in clean jeans, a cream sweater, and the only boots I owned that did not squeak when I walked. The sedan door opened before I reached it. The driver was older, silver at the temples, dressed in a dark suit that fit too well to be accidental. Miss Bennett, he said with a slight nod, holding the rear door open. Mr. Moretti asked that I make sure you arrived comfortably. I have a perfectly functional Honda, I muttered. So I have heard. There was something in his tone that suggested more than casual knowledge, and that should have unsettled me more than it did. Maybe I was getting used to being watched. That thought alone should have sent me back upstairs. The ride took us north through streets that kept getting wider, cleaner, quieter. The city changed in layers outside the tinted glass. Bodegas gave way to boutiques. Brick apartment buildings turned into townhomes with iron gates and immaculate steps. By the time the sedan slowed before a wrought iron entrance taller than my living room ceiling, I felt like I had crossed into a part of New York that existed mostly in magazine spreads and whispered rumors. The gates opened without the car even stopping. Security cameras tracked us in small silent turns. Trees lined the drive, their early spring branches still bare, and at the end of the long curve sat a house that was too large and too elegant to be called anything as simple as a house. Stone facade, tall windows catching silver light. The kind of place built to outlast generations and secrets both. I stepped out with my bag slung over one shoulder and immediately regretted not wearing something nicer, then got annoyed with myself for caring. The front doors opened before I reached them. Adrian was already there. No overcoat this time. Just a charcoal sweater beneath a dark blazer, sleeves pushed back enough to reveal strong forearms, and a watch that probably cost more than my student loans. He looked less like the storm on the dock and more like the version of danger people willingly invited into boardrooms and fundraisers because it wore expensive shoes and never raised its voice. "You came," he said. No greeting. No smile. Just that low, steady tone that always made simple words sound loaded. "For 1 hour," I replied, stepping inside before he could offer his hand or another order disguised as concern. The foyer alone was bigger than my apartment, all pale stone, quiet light, and the kind of polished floors that made me instantly conscious of the fact that my boots had seen both corridors and harbor mud in the past 24 hours. Somewhere deeper in the house, I heard quick footsteps. "Claire." Lily launched herself into my legs before I could brace for it, her small arms wrapping around me with surprising strength for a child who had nearly drowned the night before. I crouched automatically, bag slipping from my shoulder as I steadied her. She smelled like shampoo and crayons and clean cotton, so gloriously alive that it made my eyes sting for one dangerous second. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. She leaned back just enough to inspect me with solemn dark eyes. "You are not wearing blue." I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound felt strange in that house, too bright and too human. "No, today I am off duty." "Good," she said seriously, taking my hand as if the matter had been settled to her satisfaction. "Then you can stay longer." I looked up at Adrian over the top of her head. He was watching us with an expression I could not untangle. Relief, maybe. Something more complicated than relief, definitely. "That was not the deal," I said. Lily tugged my fingers. "Please. It is unfair how much power one small voice can have when it comes from a child you have already pictured not breathing." Adrian stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough that his presence entered the edges of everything. "She did not sleep until dawn," he said quietly. "Every time she woke up, she asked if you were safe." My throat tightened in the most inconvenient way possible. Lily pressed closer to my side, warm and trusting and heartbreakingly unaware of how dangerous trust can be. I opened my mouth to repeat that I could only stay an hour. Before I could, one of the men near the staircase crossed the hall and spoke in a low voice to Adrian, too soft for me to catch the words. I saw the change immediately. Adrian did not move, did not react in any visible way, but the air around him altered, sharpened, cooled. His gaze flicked once toward the front windows, then returned to Lily and me. "Take her to the sunroom," he said to me, calm. As ever. Too calm. "Why?" His eyes held mine for half a beat longer than usual. "Because I would prefer you away from the front of the house for the next few minutes." It was the phrasing that did it. Not alarm. Not panic. Preference. Control wrapped so neatly around warning that it almost passed for courtesy. Almost. Something cold slipped down my spine. "Adrian," I said softly, tightening my grip on Lily's hand. "What happened?" He glanced toward the window again, then back at me, and for the first time since I had met him, the truth showed at the edges of his composure. Not fear for himself. Fear for us. "Someone is outside," he said, "and I need you to do exactly what I ask." For one suspended second, nobody moved. Lily's fingers tightened around mine, small and warm and trusting, while the silence in the foyer stretched so thin it felt like glass. I had spent enough years in emergency medicine to recognize the shift that comes right before everything changes. It was never loud at first. It was always the tiny things. The way people stopped blinking. The way voices lowered instead of rose. The way danger entered a room long before anyone named it. "Lily," Adrian said, and his voice changed in a way I had not heard before. Not harsher, softer, more precise. The kind of tone adults use when they need children to obey without understanding why. "Go with Claire to the sunroom." Lily looked up at him immediately. "Are you coming too?" He crouched in front of her, one hand smoothing her hair back from her face with a tenderness so instinctive it almost hurt to watch. "In a minute." She studied him with the solemn seriousness children save for moments they can feel but not explain. Then she nodded once and turned back to me. "Come on," she whispered, as if I were the one who needed convincing. I let her pull me down the hall, but not before throwing Adrian one last look over my shoulder. He was already standing again, shoulders squared, one hand in his pocket, listening as the man beside him spoke quietly into an earpiece. Control radiated off him so completely it should have calmed me. Instead, it did the opposite. Because control that perfect only exists when someone has had to practice it through chaos. The sunroom overlooked the back gardens, all glass walls and pale linen furniture and soft afternoon lights spilling across the floor. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like being tucked into the safest corner of a storm while pretending you could not hear the thunder. Lily climbed onto a deep cream sofa and tucked her legs beneath her, a coloring book already waiting on the low table, as if someone in this house anticipated every possible need before it could become a problem. "Do you like butterflies?" she asked, opening the book to a page full of wings and flowers. I sat beside her because standing felt impossible. "I do." She handed me a lavender pencil from an enormous tin and started coloring with fierce concentration, tongue peeking out slightly at the corner of her mouth. It was such an ordinary little girl gesture that for a second my chest squeezed painfully. Ordinary should have belonged to her. Docks in black water and men with watchful eyes should not. "Daddy gets quiet when he is worried," she said after a moment, still coloring. "He gets more quiet than usual." I looked down at the butterfly in my lap, suddenly unable to trust my voice. "Does he?" She nodded. "And everybody else gets extra polite." Despite everything, I almost smiled. It was such a perfect 6-year-old observation of power that I wondered how often she had watched adults rearrange themselves around her father. Before I could answer, movement flashed outside the back windows. Not close. Farther down, near the hedge line. 2 men in dark coats, changing position, one speaking into his wrist. Security. My pulse climbed anyway. Lily did not even look up. That told me more than it should have. This was not normal, but it was not unfamiliar either. The door behind us opened softly. I turned too fast, every nerve already wound tight. Adrian stepped inside alone. No phone, no jacket, no visible panic. But the calm on his face had edges now, and I was beginning to understand that his calm was never the absence of danger. It was the way he stood between danger and everyone else. Lily looked up and brightened. "You came." I said I would. He crossed to her first, because of course he did, touching the top of her head lightly before his gaze found mine. "There is a reporter at the front gate," he said. "Someone tipped them off that Lily was involved in an incident last night." My stomach dropped. "A reporter? And a photographer?" He said it flatly, but something darker moved beneath the words. Not outrage. Containment. Calculation. I set the lavender pencil down carefully. How would anyone know she was at the dock? His eyes held mine. "That is what I intend to find out." Lily looked between us, sensing enough to go quiet. I lowered my voice. "And me?" The question came out before I could stop it. It should not have mattered. It did. Adrian stepped closer, not enough to frighten Lily, just enough that I could see the tension pulled tight along his jaw. "Your name was not released," he said. "It will not be. You cannot guarantee that." Something flashed in his expression then, sharp and absolute, and almost offended by the idea of his limits. "Watch me." The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they landed like a promise. Lily reached for my hand again, and when I looked down, her small fingers threaded trustingly through mine. Adrian saw it. His gaze followed the gesture and changed, just slightly, into something that felt far more dangerous than anger. Possessive was the wrong word. Protective was closer, but even that did not go far enough. It was the look of a man realizing the line between his world and mine had already been crossed, and that he had no intention of letting anyone drag me back through it alone. The air in the sunroom felt different after that. Not safer, just clearer, like whatever illusion of distance I had been clinging to had finally cracked wide open. A reporter at the gate meant the night at the harbor had already begun to spread beyond memory and fear and hospital records. It meant strangers were trying to turn Lily's worst moment into a headline. It meant Adrian's world was exactly as dangerous and far-reaching as it had felt from the first second I saw those black SUVs cut through the fog. Lily kept coloring beside me, one pink pencil clenched in her small fist, humming under her breath with the fragile confidence children borrow from the adults they trust. I watched her for a moment and felt something settle inside me that had nothing to do with reason. I had not gone into the water because I was brave. I had gone because leaving her there had never been an option. Somehow, sitting in that glass-walled room with her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, I realized that feeling had not faded now that she was dry and breathing and safe inside a house with gates and guards and polished stone floors. If anything, it had gotten worse. Adrian remained standing across from us, one hand braced on the back of a chair, eyes moving once toward the gardens before returning to Lily. Always returning to Lily. That, more than anything else, made him impossible to reduce into simple categories. Powerful men I understood in theory. Exhausted fathers I understood in practice. Adrian was both at once, and the combination was disorienting. How long until they leave? I asked quietly. When they understand they are wasting their time, he said. And if they do not? His gaze lifted fully to mine. Then they will still leave. I should have found that answer alarming. Instead it landed with a strange, guilty sense of relief. Maybe because for the last 24 hours, every time the world had tilted under me, Adrian had responded like gravity itself was negotiable as long as he was standing upright. It was infuriating. It was also, in some deeply inconvenient way, comforting. Lily held up her page suddenly. Look. The butterfly was uneven and bright and perfect in the way children's drawings always are, more feeling than form. She had colored one wing lavender and the other gold. That is us, she announced. I smiled despite the tightness in my chest. Us. Me and you. She pointed at the mismatched wings. Because you came out of the dark water and did not leave. The room went silent around those words. I looked at the page, then at her serious little face, and something inside me gave way so quietly I almost did not feel it happen. Adrian did. I knew he did, because when I looked up, his expression had changed. No walls gone. No dramatic softness. Just a single unguarded truth at the edges of his eyes. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. As if he understood that Lily had just spoken aloud the thing neither of us had wanted to name. I had crossed into their lives in one frozen, violent breath, and none of us knew how to. Uncross it now. Claire. Adrian said my name softly, careful not to disturb Lily's peace. Come with me for a moment. I hesitated. Lily answered for me by leaning against my arm and continuing to color, apparently satisfied that I was not disappearing anytime soon. I rose and followed Adrian a few steps away, not out of sight, just far enough that our voices would not carry. Up close, the control on his face was still there, but fatigue had finally found him. It lived in the faint shadow beneath his eyes and in the quiet pause before he spoke. You should not go home tonight. I stared at him. That is not your decision. It became my concern the moment someone tried to put cameras on my gate with my daughter's name attached to last night. Adrian, that does not automatically make me your responsibility. No, his voice dropped lower, roughened by something deeper than frustration. You became my responsibility when you went into freezing water for a child you did not know and came out shaking, but still trying to save everyone else first. The words hit harder than they should have. Harder because they were not dramatic. Harder because they were true. I folded my arms, partly for warmth, partly because I suddenly felt too exposed standing there under that gaze. You cannot just decide things for me because you are grateful. This is not gratitude. The answer came too quickly, too cleanly, like it had been waiting under his skin for hours. We both went still. Behind us, Lily kept humming over her coloring book, the sound small and sweet and heartbreakingly normal. Adrian's eyes never left mine. Then what is it? I asked, and the question came out quieter than I meant it to. For a second I thought he would not answer. Then he stepped half an inch closer, just enough to make the air between us feel claimed by something neither safe nor simple. The night you saved my daughter, he said, each word precise, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. You stopped being someone I could let the world overlook. My breath caught. Outside, beyond the glass, the garden stood still under pale afternoon light, as if nothing in the world had shifted. But inside me, everything had. Because there are some moments that do not ask permission before they divide your life into. Before and after. And standing there with Lily's laughter behind me, and Adrian Moretti looking at me like I had become a fact he intended to protect, I knew with a certainty that felt almost like fear that my ordinary life was already slipping out of reach. Not because he ordered it to, not even because danger had brushed too close, but because some part of me, the part one trusted least and felt most, had already begun to lean toward the impossible warmth of being seen.